gentlemen, welcome to Fantasy Literature Track. I'm not entirely certain what the name of this panel is beyond historical fantasy. Seska gave it a great name too. Historical fantasy, world building based on true lore and cultures. So, we have wonderful panelists here today, and we're going to introduce you to them all at once. They're all going to tell you in the same microphone. No, I'm kidding. We're going to start here, and I'm going to tell you why I'm here, and then we're going to go to my left. Once we get down to the end, we're going to start asking questions. Now, we do ask that you hold your questions to the end, even if this is your most favorite author in the world and you desperately have something you need to ask them. There is a time and a place for that, and it is not until we tell you. All right? So, my name is Mera. I know, it's great, right? You'd think I was Space Mom. Nobody got that reference? General Leia Solo? Okay, thank you. I'm on the wrong track. Literally and figuratively. Okay, my name is Mera Rose. For those of you who have no idea who I am, the reason I'm here is because, well, Seska asked, and I cannot say no to that woman. I've tried. I cannot find ways. She's very manipulative. I'm actually a loner that has now become permanent from the costuming track. In addition to being a professional costumer and a professional education and disabilities advocate, I also once upon a time did wear the author hat, and Seska has been trying to convince me to do it again. So that is a cautionary tale. Be careful how much you hang out with that woman. She will find a way to make you right. She is a force of nature. So, all that said, you can find anything about me you ever wanted to know on Facebook through Mera Rose or through Prop House 42. And that is all you really want to hear from me other than questions, because you came to see these phenomenal authors. The first one sitting to my left is Phillip Ligon. I'm just going to preface this by saying I have diabetic retinopathy, and I swear that says light. But apparently it's Ligon, and I am so sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm Phillip Ligon. I am an author. I've written one series, the Indian series. This is what those books look like.
That is great cover art.
Yeah, they are beautiful covers. Beautiful. I've got another series out that I'm working on right now. Well, it's out but not out. It is in between publishers at the moment, but this will be available once again at the end of the year, first of next year, along with the second and third part of the series. This is a steampunk fantasy series, this first one. This other one is a steampunk series. They're a lot of fun to write. I enjoy writing. That's what I get to do in my spare time. So.
And where can they find your work?
You can find my work. It's available on Amazon. It's also available through my publisher, jumpmasterpress.com. You can find me on Facebook at Phillip Ligon Writer. You can find me on Instagram as well. And I am known to put a few tweets out there every once in a while.
I'm going to find you on Facebook so I never mispronounce your name again. Alrighty. Mark?
Yep, my name is Marc Edelheit. I write porn. I write military science fiction and military fantasy, and yeah.
Totally the same thing.
And
especially in this group.
Yeah. I've been published for about 7 years now. It's been an unbelievably wild ride. I'm an indie published author. We sell the audio rights to a number of publishers, but we've moved about 1.5 million books in that time. I've got 22 books out. We've about 200, we're approaching almost that 200 million Kindle Unlimited page reads, and one of my series is getting made into a TV series, which is really cool. I'm super excited about. But it's the best job ever. I get to make stuff up for a living and get paid for it, and it's been just a whirlwind. I'm one of the success stories, and I'm very grateful for all of my readers, especially those that came out today.
His books are fabulous. Thank you. All right, next up, I believe that's Jennifer sitting beside you, right?
I'm Jennifer Blackstream. I write urban fantasy. If you go to my website, jenniferblackstream.com, and sign up for my mailing list, you can get a free short story in a whodunit form.
Oh, that's awesome. We love freebies. All right, and right down there on the end, that is Chris H. Jackson, the most wonderful pirate on the face of the planet. If you didn't get a chance to see him at the Page to Stage, dancing as a pirate on stage, look for that video when we publish it too.
Thanks very much for that. Embarrassing moment.
She's never gonna let you forget it.
No,
Oh no, he really was
that will
phenomenal.
live in infamy. Okay, well, I write an embarrassing amount of stuff. I've been writing for a really long time. I have about 30-some books, 35 books under my belt, and innumerable short stories, etc., etc., etc. Mostly fantasy, a lot of nautical fantasy, although some of my fantasy is magical assassins, necromancers, things like that too. I also write post-apocalyptic novels. I write science thrillers. I am a scientist by trade. A trade I haven't practiced in almost 20 years.
Mad scientist.
Oh,
Getting close.
just really pissed off scientist, I think.
Oh, angry
Those are the best
scientist.
kinds.
Let's see, what else? Science thrillers. I have a science thriller called Falstaff, the Dragons of Boston series. That's very Michael Crichton with lots of genetics. I'm all over the map, but if you want to find me, easiest place is my website, Jack's Books, J-X Books. That's me.
And again, he is a phenomenal pirate.
And you will see me tonight in the dating game, so.
Oh, you're one of my panelists for the
Yes.
dating game?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so glad I brought Space. Okay. Alrighty, so this panel is absolutely all about all of the historical inspirations that come from real culture and real lores that have inspired these wonderful authors and the characters and world building specifically that they have put into their books. So the first thing I'm going to ask you, I'm actually going to go down the line here. We'll start with Chris since we started with this end. Put him on the spot first. So when you were doing your writing for I'm going to pick on your pirate series here. What research did you do, or what knowledge did you draw off of, what lore did you draw off of to create your world?
Okay, as far as most of the nautical aspects, I've been on the ocean most of my life. My dad was a fisherman. I cut my teeth on the back deck of a fishing boat. I've sailed the Caribbean, honestly, swear to God, 13 years. But that's modern sailing, modern boats and stuff like that. To get into historical sailing vessels and techniques and stuff like that, I just did an absolute ton of research. One of my favorite series that really got me into tall ships was the Patrick O'Brien series. A Master and Commander was the theatrical version of, well, it was kind of a mishmash of a couple of his books, but they are phenomenal. And if you want to truly experience them in the right accents and with all the humor attached, I can highly recommend the audiobooks by Patrick Tull, narrated by Patrick Tull, not the other Patrick.
They're really good.
They are really good.
sensational.
Yes.
He does all the accents accurately, and you get so many of the jokes that you don't get just reading it because it's all intonation. There's a ton of research out there, easily available. The evolution of sailing ships and how warfare basically pushed that evolution. The construction of ships got more beefy because of cannons that have an embarrassing amount of recoil and tend to shake ships apart that aren't built more structurally sound. Which just sounds odd, because the sea will bust up a ship too, right? But cannons have that massive recoil. So the evolution of ships was pushed by firearms. Whereas my ships in most of my pirate novels, there's no gunpowder. So I get to tone that down a little bit. I have lighter, faster, more maneuverable pirate ships.
Same question, Jennifer. So how did any culture or lore and the research that you did, what research did you do into the culture and lore to build your world?
I made up my world, but when I used a character that used voodoo, I did a lot of research on that in an attempt to not be offensive.
So when you were doing the research on voodoo religions, which specific, did you stick with tribes? Did you go to all of the various cultures you could find and pull?
I did. I started with Marie Laveau. Right.
New Orleans?
So yeah, I started with that and then just kind of went down all the little rabbit holes start. So I had a somewhat shallow overview of all of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Did you, in the research that you did into voodoo, did you find any particular practices that ended up shaping your world or shaping the characters?
I can't think of one specific thing that did it, so much as the reverence that comes with it.
Right.
If that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does.
I love the very hands-onness of the faith. And even the theatrical seeming parts of it were all very real, it feels one-on-one no matter what they're doing.
That's awesome. All right, Mark, so
So-
what did you research? What experience did you draw from?
Well, my real passion is military science fiction, and I wanted to write a science fiction book, but I thought, well, why don't I write fantasy for my first book, and it should be easier. Well, it wasn't. I'm kind of stuck in fantasy now because we've been so successful. Actually, published my first military science fiction book a year and a half ago, and the second one I just wrapped up, but I'm working on 4 books at the same time.
That's quite prolific.
Yeah, it's just been really good. But when I came up with my world, I thought about the technology level that I wanted in my fantasy setting. And most of the fantasy books I read are, it's a medieval setting. And I said, you know what? We know a lot about the Romans, so why don't I go ahead and put it in a Roman setting on a fantasy world? So I did a ton of research. I mean, a ton. Because I wanted to get it right, because I figured, you get it wrong, somebody's going to call you out. And they do.
Generally in panels like this.
Yeah. Or in reviews.
Exactly.
So I put my world in, I made it a Roman world. And I made it not just a Roman world, but the norms, how the people thought and acted and behaved in that world. And then I threw magic in, and I threw some other races in, and made it really interesting. And I tried to make it as authentic as possible so that, some of the things that happen in the book would be considered war crimes today. And I've had people go ahead and email me and say, I really love Steiger. He's one of my favorite characters that I've ever read. But I can't decide if his empire, they're the good guys or the bad guys. And my response to that always is, did the Carthaginians think the Romans were the good guys? And the answer is no. So it's all a matter of perspective. But it's been a lot of fun, and it's also been liberating writing about it because I'm writing about kind of like a people that lived 2,000 years ago, that their thought processes are very different than our own. And it's fun exposing readers to that, exposing how similar we as a people are today as they were back then. And it's just absolutely fascinating. So part of my job as a writer is to educate, and every once in a while you get it wrong. I'm going to add one extra thing to it.
I'll go for it.
I had a Harvard professor go ahead and send me an email and say, listen, I really love your books.
Oh, that's
Great.
awesome.
They're great. But,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But-
There's always a but, and it always comes from the professor.
yeah, so this was like, I had finished the 3rd book I'd written, which was Tiger State, and they're like, but every time you mention Steiger waited like 5 seconds or 10 seconds or whatnot, bugs me, because the Romans didn't have a way to measure seconds. They had minutes, but they had no seconds. So that sent me down researching it, and I was like, damn it, she's right. So I had to go back and change it. But it's little things. You can't cover everything, but you do the best job you can as a writer, and 9 times out of 10 you get it right.
What about you, Phillip?
Well, I've got the one series, the Century series, it's based in Victorian England, which steampunk, that is your typical setting. It's not always the setting for it. It's
Gotta
really
love the
branched out,
gaslight, right?
yeah, into other areas. But this particular series is Victorian era. Now, Victorian era is very popular, and there is a plethora of resources out there, which is good. You want to go down, you want to study the Victorian era? Boy, there's a lot of stuff that you can study for it, which is good, because you can get the materials, you can study, which I had to do, study the dresses, the clothing they wore, their mannerisms.
Oh my goodness, you're speaking to my heart.
Even things that they ate and how they ate them, and just their morality and all those areas. Like I said, you can find it out there, which is helpful, but it can also be bad because if you put it in your book, you've got to really make sure you have it right, because there are plenty of people out there that will be able to identify and say, hey, you got that wrong. You know, that needs to be fixed.
Actually, I'm really glad you brought up morality, because that brings us to our next question. So a lot of these cultures have very different viewpoints, especially for the times that they existed. So how did you accommodate for that in your world building? And that's actually directly to you, Phillip, and we'll go that way with it.
Oh boy.
Going up and down the panel.
Well, to make it believable, you do have to capture at least the essence of the way people thought and the way they acted and the way they approached life in general. But being here in the 21st century, you start writing something in the 19th century. You know, there are some projections into the way things were back then. We don't know exactly the way things were. We don't always know exactly how they would have handled certain situations, but you do strive to make it as believable as you can. And you certainly don't want to get into it so much that it takes away from the story, that it takes away from the characters, but you do want to be as true to the setting as you possibly can.
Mark?
Yeah, I think you have to own it if you're going to write about that time period, the good and the bad, because otherwise it's not going to be genuine. It's not going to be authentic. It's going to ring hollow. And I know authors that go out of their way to be politically correct and stuff like that. And I think if you're writing about a period of Victorian times, you're writing about the Roman times or voodoo or whatnot. There are, you can cushion some of the blows, but those people thought very different than we think today. And if you're not authentic, you're going to turn off readers. And you'll turn off readers who, don't like that. But you're not going to make everybody happy as an author. It's fun. By the way, are you a fan of Victoria, the TV show on BBC?
I've not watched it.
Have you seen it?
I have.
It's good,
Isn't it?
It's
Yes,
awesome.
it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'll check that out.
I just love the fact that he brought up that he researched the costumes as well, because the costumes and the clothing are so much of a part of cultures. And honestly, I think that's something I've seen a lot of authors draw off of to design their characters and their worlds. Not just to describe the worlds that they're building, but also to kind of fuel the characters in the way that they act. Jennifer, have you done that?
Hold on 1 second. Speaking
Yeah,
of the
sure.
dresses, was it when Victorian times moved, they were wearing the crinoline, is that right?
Crinoline, yeah.
A lot of women
Perfect.
died at the parties because the dresses wouldn't catch fire and they had no way to extinguish them and get them out.
A lot of women died from corsets too.
Yeah.
And actually what I found as I was studying, you have that traditional crinoline that they wore, but it evolved through the decades. So depending on what decade your story was set in was different styles. And it literally changed every 5 to 10 years during that time period, the style. So.
And it was highly flammable. I mean, it was, and all they had were candles and, tragic.
So yeah, so I was asking Jennifer, did the cultural dress and the voodoo aspects, did that drive anything with the characters for your books?
No.
That's actually not a bad thing. I mean, it is supposed to be fantasy, right?
It is fantasy, and I do lean very heavily on that. Plus, my world, since I made it up specifically because details like that are very difficult for me to hold on to. And the amount of time and research it would have taken me to get details like that right would not have been worth. I have 2 children. My writing time is somewhat precious. And so for me, it was a choice where you're either going to get all those details right if you're going to decide to focus on that and I'm going to be completely historically accurate, or you need to say, you know what, I am very much more story-oriented than detail-oriented than, I'm not educating you on what people wore at a certain time period.
Right.
If, they're murder mysteries, or for my earlier series, paranormal romance, if you're gonna get upset that I didn't tell you exactly what kind of dress it is, then you're reading the wrong books.
I got you. Actually, I love the fact that you do paranormal romance too, by the way. That's pretty cool. So with the fantasy worlds that you built, did you build a specific like culture into it? Did you write your
Well,
own?
I'm going to agree with Mark as far as if you decide to portray certain cultures, or even if you've made up your own culture and you've decided to give them a characteristic that is not going to be welcomed by the majority, you do need to own it. You need to, because if you're going to start making excuses, that's just a pin. But I have problems sometimes because I have an otherworld like Interpol version, and they are used for if you have a crime committed that involves two different cultures, you can call in a Vanguard member and they kind of mediate, because the morals, the laws are different, as is their idea of punishment. And I've had readers say, that is not fair how this culture punishes, and I'm like, yes, but to tell them you need to have our idea of punishment, what we think is fair, I'm like, that's problematic. And the whole point of it was to show how different the cultures are and how rough it is when you decide that you are literally going to respect all the cultures.
So, Chris, pirates have their own cultural laws and regulations they follow, right?
Right. Well, I'll back up just a little bit. So I want to stress that I do not write historical fantasy. I write in my own world. So I am not writing Rome, for instance.
Yeah.
I am writing something I use elements of different cultures. The research thing is a massive rabbit hole. I'm currently researching Mongol horsemanship, archery, weapons.
Wow.
It is totally fascinating. It was the biggest nation in the world was Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
And
It was quite prolific.
quite
Yes,
prolific,
yes.
30-something sons, something like that. Anyway, and it was all about tactics and how and horsemanship, and so I stress on those things. Now, in my fantasy world, for the most part, most of my cultures are a little bit more egalitarian than they would be in that era of Earth's history, because I love strong female characters, women warriors, women necromancers, and I'm not going to cheat my readers out of enjoying things that I love to write.
Absolutely.
And so,
See, that's why I threw in elves and dwarves
Right, yeah.
and gnomes and dragons, because you can get all that into your world.
And that's even more important to own, is to make your, go ahead, let's say it, Tolkienian races
Yeah.
your own.
Yes.
So my elves are very different than Tolkien's elves. My dwarves are kind of like Tolkien's dwarves until you get up close and personal to them. And then they have really raucous sense of humor, but also the women are wield no sharp metal, but they are earth priestesses and wicked powerful, and can bend ocean.
That's awesome.
So I have fun with these races, and one of my most recent ones I'm working on is an Asian motif, and it's very much Harry Potter meets Kung Fu.
Okay.
With magic.
Is it
I actually really want to read
Kung Fu
that.
or Kung Fu Panda?
Oh.
So my primary character, and here's where I get into elements, like cultural elements that are fun to play with, but I get to use other races. So my primary character is half Oni. Everybody know what an Oni is? It's an
Okay.
Asian ogre.
So yeah, so let's talk about that, because
Right.
that's actually, you're jumping way ahead.
Okay,
You're jumping
we can
way
do it
ahead.
later, but I just want to get to the point that I use cultural elements, not full cultures. I don't take something whole cloth, cut it, paste it into my novels.
Gotcha.
But I have a lot of fun with, Middle Eastern cultures, Asian cultures especially, islander cultures. I just wrote the Pacific novel. It's science fiction, but I just love South Pacific Islander cultures. They're so rich and so amazing. So.
See, and I like that. I like the more inspired by. You find
Right,
this little tidbit,
exactly.
like it's
Yes.
like any anthropology
Right.
class, you're gonna get little
Right.
insights that
Like
you want
like
to
tattoos. Tattoos originated in the South Pacific.
Mhm. So when you are writing your worlds,
Sure.
and writing your characters, and you're creating races. You mentioned that everyone has their own take on elves, they have their own take on orcs, that kind of thing. What did you tweak from the lore, and why specifically did you tweak it?
For a race, you mean?
Yeah, for
Okay,
races.
one of the
Just
races,
examples.
One of the races I'm most proud of is my Merfolk race in my Signatar Seas novels. I don't have those here, but I won 3 sequential national awards with that series.
They're really good.
We're making a race of Merfolk that are a lot more fish than humanoid at all. I was educated as a marine biologist. My wife is an evolutionary biologist with a marine orientation, so we got the fish part right. With a lot of fun twists like mating and population pressure, pushing them over psychologically into more violent behavior, and child rearing. A lot of fish are what they call mouth breeders. As soon as the eggs hatch, the fingerlings hide in the male's mouth, or in some cases they have a pouch, like seahorses. But the male does the child rearing. And so I got to play on that these are sentient creatures, right? And they're trying to wean the kids, so when somebody scratches at the door up to their little grotto, all the kids are like at Dad's mouth, let us in, let us in, let us in. And he's like, nope, gotta go hide someplace else. So there's lots of things to do, but I had so much fun just creating a race of my own. No, there's no mammaries, there's no shells, no shell dogs.
So Jennifer, can you tell us about one of your character types, races?
My favorite are my goblins, and they were an accident. I had my witch PI training, and I just need someone for her to be fighting. I like a goblin, and then he just raged out of control. And so my goblins, their senses aren't great, so their worlds are a little hazy, a little gray, not a lot of fun, unless they're experiencing pain, in which case they see more like us, they see all the colors there, and it's very pleasurable to them, so they're all masochists. But evolutionary speaking, to survive that, they have lots of extra organs, but there's no uniformity to it. So they're a little challenging to kill because you don't really know how many hearts does this goblin have? Are they working with extra kidneys? And they, like my goblin that ends up being an ally, refuses healing. Like, that's actually the threat she uses. Like, how many injuries do you have right now? I can heal all of them if you don't.
I suddenly want to
They're
create a
also-
role-playing game
Because they're very pain-oriented too. They're by your side in the battle, you defeated all the enemies, and they're not done. So they're looking around at you, and you need an exit plan. Like, you know what? I feel like now you should go over there. You need to redirect them. And they're great for information because I also make them very prolific. So they've got like hundreds of siblings. So they're great for information if you're willing to take that risk.
So Mark, what about you?
So, my first book, Staggers, it's really intrusion fantasy. It's low fantasy to begin, and as the story unfolds, more and more elements become introduced. More characters, more races. First there's an elf, and then there are dwarves, and then there are gnomes, and dragons, and all that good stuff. But the gnomes have to be my favorite because they're little, sick, sadistic bastards that have no fear, and they're like the nuclear option when it comes to solving a problem. And when they solve a problem, it generally creates more problems than it solves. So they've been a lot of fun to write, and I had a review, and I wrote a prequel that published in July called By Bow, Daggers, and Sword, and it follows my elven character a couple hundred years before he meets Steiger. And one of the reviews gave me a 5-star review and said, this book was okay, but there were no notes. So it's fun, and I try to make every single race unique in a way. They think different, they operate different, they are different. Tolkien gave us a really rich universe to play with when it comes to the races, and it's in a way it's a shared universe because it's all connected, all the books, and I just find that fascinating, and it's something to really play upon and build upon, and it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. So Philip, what about you? How do you use the lures to kind of influence and then take it off on its own path?
So even though these are steampunk books, this engine series in particular is a steampunk fantasy. It's where, again, in Victorian England, a portal's been opened up into a magical realm, so it brings all kinds of fantasy creatures into the human world: elves, dwarves, dragons, you name it. And one of the creatures that it brings in is a cyclops. Now, cyclops is not what? It's not a fantasy creature, right? It's a mythological creature. Is it
Well, mythological.
Roman or Greek creature? But in their world, they have a particular name for them, and it's not cyclops. Well, when they popped into the human world, well, they look very much a lot like a cyclops, and so that's kind of the name that stuck with them. So people called them cyclops, but one thing that was for that particular creature is that of all the magical creatures in their world, the magic is an elixir. They take it like an elixir, and an elf can only take one at a time. A dwarf can only take one at a time. A human can only take one at a time, but a cyclops can take more than one. They can take more than two. They might be able to take 3 or 4, and so they get powers with them every time. So cyclops are highly sought after in terms of just being able to do special things, combining different kinds of magics together, and they are very strong creatures, and so people really, if they can't hire them, they try to enslave them. So there's a lot of that going on, and of course, you get crossways with the Cyclops, and he gets free. Look out, because you're in trouble. So that was a lot of fun. And then dragons, I'll throw this out there too. Dragons in this world, they tend to be a beast of burden. They're not very bright, but they are good for heavy duty work. And so the humans, once the dragons started coming in, they thought, hey, we can use dragons to plow our fields, and we can plow more fields using dragons than we can using oxen or whatever we have, mules or anything like that. And so they started experimenting with using dragons, and they were producing, the fields were, they were able to have bigger fields and produce more food. But unfortunately, about the time that the harvest came around, the dragons decided to turn around and just bake everything and fry it. So yeah, kind of a failed experiment there.
It sounds a little bit like, dragons have fur, so that's a hazard that comes with owning them, even if they're not smart. So Jennifer touched on anthropology a little bit earlier, and you were just talking about kind of the social political climate that you created in your book for the various races to exist in. What have you drawn from, or have you drawn from anything historically coming from the perspective of previous historical events, or maybe characters in real history, if anything, in your books? Jennifer?
I think I already spent my penny with Maria Rose.
Yes, but she's pretty awesome. She's really awesome.
I love the psychological aspect there of, did she own a beauty parlor of some kind?
Mm-hmm.
Just getting all kinds of gossip and then using that later to appear significantly more mystical in small moments. And I love that.
She is one of probably the most interesting people to draw from too, I think, simply because of the fact that she has such a intense, for those who don't know, voodoo culture, bayou culture, Cajun culture, is a very intense, very theatrical, like you were saying, very, and by the way, I do know that of which I speak. I married a Cajun. All right. If you actually saw my last name on this, you would not even question what I'm talking about. It ends in E-A-U-X. So that said, when you look at all of the stuff that Mary had, and you talk about those guys and things, did you use any of that in your books? as far as the social personal interaction type stuff that she had?
I believe I used a ceremony with the Loa. Am I saying that?
I have no idea if you're saying that correctly, but I do know what you're talking about. It's the Loaha.
It's just Loa.
Oh, yes, okay.
Like a spirit. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, not like a spirit, but gods.
Yeah.
Yes.
A spirit. Yeah, not an animal, but a spirit that
Mhm.
is always with you.
Yeah, it's kind of like I'd say it's like a guide, but it's more like, yeah, kind of a blend between.
I took from that the idea of when, because in their ceremonies, they would call the Loa to possess them,
Mhm.
literally. And then the Loa would act through them using their body. And I loved that part of summoning them was like, I believe, Papa Legba. It was some form of alcohol and cigar that he was particularly partial to. And you see the memes on Facebook, what would you use to summon me? And everything was so personal, but they were very accessible. And I love the idea of taking items that somebody loved and using that to bring them closer to you.
So what about you, Mark?
I wrote a series called the Carousel, which follows the Ninth Roman Legion, which is one of the greatest historical mysteries out there. In around 121 to 122 AD, the entire Ninth Roman Legion just disappeared. And you think, 1 minute it was in the history books, in the historical record, and the next it was gone. And you think a Roman Legion, not a big deal, it's a few thousand men. That was about 25% of the combat power in England, at what is today modern day England. Back then it was Britannia. And I wrote, it explains how the Romans got to my fantasy world, Tanis and then Istros. But basically, half of that book is historical fiction, and I had to nail it because I had inadvertently married two favorite genres of people's with Steigers, which was Roman historical fiction and fantasy. I brought them together in a very unique way. So I had to tell the tale of the Roman legions and the Romans and how they got to this world. What makes it so fascinating is because of who they were, the Romans believed at that time in different gods. They believed in dragons. There were actually Roman legates who wrote the high command, the emperor, whatever, and saying, hey, I couldn't complete this objective, this isn't true, because there was a dragon there. I couldn't do what you wanted me to do. They actually wrote that, so they believed in these things, which made it so much fun for when the entire legion with their auxiliary cohorts and their camp followers, because wherever the legions went, the camp followers, the unofficial families, went with them. The children, the wives, the people that kept the legion going. And they get transported to a fantasy world, and they start encountering fantasy creatures, dragons, elves, dwarves. And to them, the Roman mind back then is totally plausible, which makes it so much fun, because I created this world that they went to, and then had fun with it. But they're still Roman. They still think the way the Romans do, and it's just an absolute blast. But what sucked though was
So now you're trending on to the next question, and I'm going to give it to you, but then I'm going to ask the other three.
All right, good.
Yep.
So what sucked though was 2 weeks before the Carousel launched, which I was super excited about. Doctor Who came out with an episode on the Ninth Roman Legion.
Yep.
And I was
We all
like,
loved Rory. We loved Rory. Oh my gosh, how many people loved that? Yes, it was amazing, right? Okay, so Chris, I'm gonna let you answer that question, and then we're gonna ask the last one. Then we're gonna open it up to you guys.
A particular cultural element that I used, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things in the Scimitar Seas novels that I had the most fun with is how pirates recruit. especially young people. So they take a merchant ship, they ransom people if they're ransomable. The people who aren't of any true value, they can either release them or enslave them. But the young people, they recruit it, and the way they do it is they befriend them, get them roaring drunk, no kidding, for weeks on end,
Yeah.
with no sleep, and then they press them to just join the family, be,
So basically
have
Stockholm
fights.
syndrome.
Kind of like a cult.
Even to the point of executing their former, people that were on the ship to, kind of have a recruitment thing, and then cheering them on. And when they come, this is a mind-bending process.
Yeah, that's.
This is cult recruitment does the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so it's brutal, it's shocking for things like that, for kids to be treated like that, but that was pretty much the case. And my editor kind of was kind of shocked by this, but I said it's pretty much accurate. But the scene she was kind of rattled by is a whipping scene, and the pirate commander of the small pirate nation is basically their former governess had tried to escape, and they were punishing her, and he was handing a cat of nine tails to the children that were formerly under her charge, and they were whacked out of their minds on alcohol and no sleep, and they whipped her. And
Whipping back then, I mean, it is a brutal experience.
Yeah.
So
It's
we're
not a
trending
spanking
on to the
people.
last question, so I'm just gonna ask it so you guys can go with it. You ready? What is the worst part about using anything historically, even remotely accurate in these stories? And so you're talking about whipping, it sounds like that's one very unpleasant aspect that you would have to.
Unpleasant, but I say the worst aspect is when you get something wrong. And then find out later, and if you haven't gotten any negative feedback, is it worth changing, or can you just own it? And there were a couple of things that, now some of my most recent stuff I've submitted to like small presses and stuff, and I've disagreed with what they want to adjust, because hey, this is my world. If I want to create this race of people who are this way, don't tell me I can't. So I just pulled it. I just said, okay, no thanks. We're not seeing the same vision for this that I have. So, and as a writer, I think that's important. If you have a publisher who's not willing to go all in with you on the way that you've already developed things in a world, it's time to just find another publisher, or do it yourself.
That's actually great advice.
So,
Yeah.
there's
really
more
good
than one
advice.
A lot of people don't realize that if you go on the traditional side, their editors can basically require you to make changes that you may not like. And you have a choice. Either make the change, get the book traditionally published, or go a different direction.
And that's why I was having this conversation with him before any contract was signed. You know what I mean? And don't think as a writer that you don't have the right to do that. Here's the manuscript, what do you think? Da-da-da-da. Yeah, we want to sign you, but we have these ideas. Well, let's talk about those ideas before we sign. That's okay to say that as a writer, even a new writer.
Yeah.
What's your vision here? How do you want it to change? And if you really want the deal, if it's lucrative, if you like the publisher, they have a good reputation that you've already researched. We don't want to get into that, but if you want to make a deal, just buckle down and make the changes.
Yeah.
And
I'm gonna stop you there because that's writer's track.
Right.
All right, Philip, what was the hardest part of the history? What was the worst part of it?
Well, just the worst part would probably be just trying to get it right and strike that balance of getting it right and yet having a little bit of a unique world in that historical setting. You do want to get the historical facts accurate, and you want to do your due diligence to do that. And like we said before, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you might miss something or get something wrong, and so it's either try to correct it or just own it and go with it.
Alrighty, so we're gonna start taking your questions. Oh, I see lots of arms. Okay, great. We're gonna start with green hat here.
All right, why didn't the Eagles just fly to Mordor? In other words, to what extent have you dealt with or struggled with, or how do you address the historical elements of your world with the fantasy? If you can transmute lead to gold, what happens to your economy? If you have flying creatures, what happens to your economy? If healing is pervasive or even resurrection, what happens to all kinds of incentives that you see driving history and technology and all that stuff? And have you ever been caught in a huge pothole as a result?
I can totally feel that to start with. You be very, very careful how you build your magic system, your magical races, your dragons, things like this, and you don't break your own rules. And that is key. And that's exactly an example of, a loophole that why didn't the Eagles just fly Frodo? Well, there was these Nazgul flying around and they would have plucked him out of the air. But then you see in the theatrical version how that didn't work, how that wouldn't have worked because the Eagles kicked ass
I
on.
think Tolkien addressed that he hadn't thought of it.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's embarrassing to get caught in something like that. It really is.
So is it often that writers kind of find a thing after the fact? Have you guys gone back into your works after you've read it and gone, oh, I should have thought about that, I should have rewritten this?
I have totally done that myself, but I've gotten to the point where if I don't get any really negative feedback on it, I just let it stand. And here's something: if you're building an entire world, so they just do things differently here than they do over there. Healing, magical healing, is more common over there. It's less common here.
So
True magic
plausible
is more
explanations.
common here, less common there. It's a cultural thing.
Or what you do is you build in a counterbalance for it. Like I've got different types of dragons in the world, and when you have an army and one side has dragons, maybe the other side should have them too, and so that you can actually have the two armies fight and not worry about getting decimated by one side's dragons or whatever. But you have to build your world very carefully so you don't run into a problem like that. And that takes attention to detail, that takes planning. And every once in a while you miss the small details and somebody brings it up to you. It's just how it is. You just do your best as an author to make sure that doesn't happen.
But sometimes characters are crunchy and good with ketchup.
Mm-hmm.
All right, over here.
Thank you. So I've been researching on and off for the past few years about different mythologies because I want a world that encompasses all folklore and mythology. Where is a really good place to have a good resource for different things? Because it seems like every time I look online for one thing, if I click one link and then another one later, it's inconsistent on what these different creatures would be like or why they exist and things like that.
Well, history is inconsistent too. So.
It totally does. And I can tell you for a fact, when I do my research, I'll come across texts that are hundreds of years old or, like even thousands where it's transcribed, where they don't agree with each other. The historians don't agree. Historians in different generations write from a different political bent, and you're always going to find inconsistencies, but you do the best job you can research-wise. When you come across those inconsistencies, you have to make a decision on your own. What makes more sense for you, particularly in the world that you're going to write?
Pretty much exactly that. Cherry pick it, what is going to fit your story best. And then just, that's the way it is.
All right, David, we have two over here, so we'll go Blue Mouse and then that corner.
Yeah, so I think as a follow-up to that last question, so have you ever reached a point where you decided that there's some good, decent sources, but you feel like you're not quite sure on consistency, or you feel there's an aspect that you're just not finding? Has there ever been an instance where you felt you had to reach out to like an academic, like a professor or the like, to get a more educated and critical perspective, and of course, fact check what you've come across so far? That's kind of one of the conclusions I'm coming from in kind of the research I'm doing for my own sort of writing, because my focus that I'm trying to do for my story is Slavic folklore, which I find it fascinating. There are the sources out there. They aren't quite as prolific as, say, Greco-Roman or Norse, just because of relative popularity in popular culture and whatnot. And
Slavic references. There are a lot of really great Slavic texts actually out there. You have to know
I've
which.
been digging, but
You
it's really
have
tough to find someone who is an expert on it too, I feel.
So with the Slavic ones, that actually happens to follow my background. So I'll just tell you, when you go and you do your Google search, make sure you are not searching the current name of the province that you're looking for. Look for the historical name in the historical time frame. That's it. He's wondering, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if you've ever had to go to an outside source off of the internet and find an expert that can give you the information.
Another great resource is other writers, other fiction writers. So I don't follow Slavic culture, but I'd be willing to bet that somebody has written a fantasy novel with Slavic culture elements. And authors are some of the most approachable people in the world. I mean, look at us. We're sitting up here trying to pay it forward to everybody out there. So they're approachable. But by all means, I mean, there's universities, specialists, but as we research history, you're not going to get two people that agree on something. So you have to just cherry pick them.
Yeah.
As far as trying to be entirely accurate, if you're writing a work of fiction, my goal is always, if I'm doing research on a creature, I just imagine myself up on a panel, and somebody asks me, so you had this creature in your book, but you got this wrong. What do I say? Am I going to say, I am aware of that was a creative decision I decided to make, or do you want to be able to say, your source differs from mine, this is the source that I was using? But I don't think you're ever going to get, in mythology especially, all texts to agree.
And arguing with readers, it's just not worth it. You're not going to win. You could know you're right, and if a person's wrong, or you could realize that you're wrong and just admit it. But you're just not going to win either way.
Is there ever any real way to win arguments? Anyway, that's a whole other panel. So that's what we're writing that one. Next year.
Arguing with a
All right. So I think we had one more question over here. And then, David, I'm going to make you run back to the center. I am giving you a workout.
Just a quick question. Would you recommend to start off using archetypal characters to get the initial plot worked out before you move on to a specific myth or history?
I'm a character writer, so my characters come first.
And I'm a world writer, so my worlds come first. But then I come up with the story.
If you ask 100 writers how they write their sequence of events, you're going to get 100 different answers, and none of them are wrong because they work for that writer. And you see what I mean?
Yeah, and my advice to you would be just do what works best for you. Because what works for me or the rest of the people up here may not work for you. And don't spoil the creative process.
And if you find something not working, try something different.
Yeah.
I think as long as you can start writing, because chances are whatever you write first, you're not going to like later anyway. Whatever helps you start that crap, like.
And it never comes out when you write it. You may think you're writing the best stuff ever, and then when you go to improve it, you're like, God, this is shit.
But you cannot edit nothing.
Right.
Correct.
So if using archetypes makes it easier for you to start writing, I'd say go with that.
Do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that I like to say, I think it was Ernest Hemingway that said this, that all writing is rewriting.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true.
Correct.
It's
Yep.
so true.
It's just making it your own, right?
Exactly.
All right, we got one more question back here.
This question is in part specific to Chris, but then to the other panelists as well. You had mentioned a half Oni race, and so I was curious to hear a little bit more about that, and if there was other kind of mythological creatures or beings that kind of made their way into your stories and what they make.
Oh, good lord. Other than the Merfolk, yeah, in fact, all the different divisions of Merfolk, there are lots of different kinds of Merfolk, depending on where in the world, how deep the water, is it open ocean, in a sargassum, et
He
cetera, et
did
cetera.
happen to mention he's a marine biologist.
But they converse with coloration as fish do. So they don't speak, they don't have a spoken language, but they have motions and coloration shifts to converse. But as far as the Oni idea, there's the Oni culture. And then this particular individual is half Oni and brutal culture. I mean, horrifically brutal culture. But he escapes and he finds his way. This hasn't even hit print yet, so I can't give it all away. But that's where the Kung Fu comes in, and in Harry Potter, he's accepted into this
I
school.
feel like your publisher would want me to cut you off.
But that's where I get to play with things like that. But dragons, I have two types of dragons. I have drakes and dragons. I have sea races, I have flying races, and I have terrestrial races. I have an entire culture of wizards that are called dragon lords that study and or, I don't want to say tame because there's no such thing as a tame dragon, but ally with dragons. And in my Blood-Sea Tales series, they go to war. But I nerf that by, an enchanted ballista bolt can drop one out of the sky.
Did you really just use the term nerfed?
Absolutely.
That is phenomenal. Do you use it in your books?
Oh, no, not in the book.
I was just totally wondering because all of a sudden I had this image of a dragon flying through the sky throwing Nerf balls at people. All right, I hate to do this,
They
guys.
bring Nerf balls.
Yeah, I got you. I hate to do this, guys. We got exactly 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna let each of you answer that real quickly on your characters, and then we're gonna let you plug where you're going next. It's totally okay. You have 2 children. It's Dragon Con, and I guarantee you your brain is probably mush right now, right? So I'm going to remind you of the question. What was your question? Thank you.
Mythological or lore-based creatures, and a little bit more about how those feed into your world.
Just very briefly, the extra organ thing was inspired by Klingons.
That's phenomenal. I love it. Mythology from outside of real mythology. That's incredible. All right.
In my world, I have a lot of the mythological races, but I've also created new races like the Lost, which makes it much more fun. And it allows you to get to a point where you can be creative. And I have goblins as well. They make an appearance. They're not the nicest. They got noise too. But
If you're not talking to the microphone, they cannot hear you.
what was that?
I said if you're not talking to the microphone,
I'm
they
not talking
cannot
about
hear you.
but it's you can be as creative as you want, and what's fun about it is there's so many books on mythology, and every single culture has their own mythology, and you can take some of that, take elements and mix it with others to make your own. And one of the greatest, I guess would be considered mythology, Gremlins. Yeah.
Oh God,
Remember the movie
please,
Gremlins?
are you trying to traumatize me?
No, I know.
Oh my
But-
God,
but
he was at my last panel.
You can
I
make your
guarantee
own.
you.
Midget barbarian.
What?
No, go ahead. You were saying barbarian.
Midget barbarian.
Midget barbarian.
That would be kind of cool. See him go into a rage.
One of the things you can do too is mashups, and think of something completely different. In the Blood-Sea Tales, I created an entire nation of aboriginal sentient kangaroos. Now, kangaroos can cover ground at about 40 miles an hour, and think about militarizing that. if they could carry lances and bows and bullets.
I'm fairly certain they did that in Tank Girl too.
Right. Oh, Tank Girl?
Tank Girl,
Maybe that's
yeah,
where
militarized kangaroos.
I was channeling from somebody.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome though, I really want to
But
read
there
that
was
one.
a-
I think the
an
only one
old
of yours I
role-playing
read.
game, Gamma World, where everything was irradiated, and so there was sentient
I played
kangaroos.
that.
That's
Yeah.
very cool.
A long time ago.
Awesome.
All right, I'm gonna cut you off guys because
Holy 60. Oh.
now we're chit-chatting. You guys are gonna come up and chit-chat too, but before you do, we're gonna let our panelists tell you where they're gonna be seen next, right after we plug this special thing. What? Y'all looking at me like I'm crazy. So tomorrow night at 10 o'clock, we have the wonderful Boinky Beasties panel. Is it 10, right?
Yes.
Regina won't let me put it any earlier.
I didn't think so. All right, so Boinky Beasties is 10 o'clock. Tonight, it's Fantasy Dating Game at 10 o'clock.
Phillip didn't get a chance to answer.
I'm so sorry. I thought he did. I apologize. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, actually, Mark stole some of my answer.
Forgive me.
Whether it be mythology, whether it be fantasy, creatures, as a writer, our toolbox is huge. And there is so much that we can use to create our stories, to create our characters, to create our worlds. And mythology, fantasy, all those creatures are just they're tools that we can use to create what it is that's in our mind, what we're coming up with. So, you know, like Mark said, you know, take those elements, borrow something from one element and create something new with it.
Alrighty, so now that we have roughly about a minute left, as I was saying, we got Boinky Beasties tomorrow night at 10. We got Fantasy Dating Game tonight at 10. Also, if you want to see your fantasy literature track director,
Afterwards.
yes, Charity Color is afterwards at 11:30 p.m. If you want to see your fantasy literature track director and some of your favorite fantasy literature track volunteers do something super cool, who watches The Masquerade? They're in it this year. Yeah, it's going to be fun. You guys are going to love it. This is what happens when you bring a costumer to a new track. And tell us what panels you're on next.
This is it for me.
Oh, you're kidding. Your con is over. So where can they find you?
Still got fun.
Are you in the dealer's room?
I'm not in the dealer's room, but I'll be out and about, moving around, looking at things, checking things out, going to different panels. But yeah, this is my last
Awesome.
official panel for the weekend.
You are super lucky. Go party, enjoy.
I've got 3 panels left. I've got the Sword of Shannara tomorrow at 11, or 1, House of the Dragon. I'm going to talk about that show, which is, I think, really cool. And the Worlds of If multiverse stories in high fantasy. So you can find me on the Dragon Con app. Also, after this, I brought a bunch of books to give away. We brought about 2,000 books this year to give away. So
That's
help me unload
wonderful.
them.
Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, Jen?
You can find my other panels in the app. I will be on Boinking Beasties.
Poor woman.
Well, this is my 3rd year.
And Chris, what's your next panel?
Is it a panel? It's a dating game.
It's a dating.
Yes, I'm in the dating game, and then tomorrow I have, oh my God, I just forgot what it was. No, it's the punnery. Take
Yes.
me to the punnery.
Okay,
I'm
so
only known to float a pun.
that is actually going to be another fun panel. If you enjoyed me in any way, shape, or form, please come back because guess what? I'm actually a lot funnier when I've had caffeine.
Yeah, in the America's Mart, I have my own table. On the 3rd floor, A41.
Awesome. So
Come buy my stuff so I don't have to take it home.
come back to the fantasy literature app. I can do this. Hello. Come back to the fantasy literature app. I can't do it tonight. Why can't I do it? Come back to the fantasy literature track. We'll see you every day from now till Monday.
All right.